first Fort Nisqually, or the second Nisqually, was inland, the 1833 one. The third Fort Nisqually is the one I'll be talking about tonight, and that was built in 1843. Suppose if we could turn off the light.
Yeah. Back there by the door. There.
Can people see that? In structure 2 of Nisqually Village, the two religious objects shown on this slide were found in 1989. There are a crucifix on the right and a medallion depicting the Virgin Mary on the left. Both items are made of brass. These artifacts are of great interest by themselves, being good examples of 19th century Catholic material culture. However, the context of their find also provided scholars significant information and gave additional meaning as to the objects. The discovery of the crucifix and medallion in structure 2, along with other personal artifacts, led the archaeologist Lee Stilson to conclude that the building was the home of a prosperous Catholic family. Lee was even able to identify the household as most likely being of Jean-Baptiste Chalifou, a master carpenter who worked at Fort Nisqually. So in this way, context was very important for understanding the past. Context is also important for larger archaeological and historical topics. In the case of Fort Nisqually, which is seen on this slide, and this is an 1857 sketch of the post by James Madison Alden. I believe that to better understand the operations of the Puget Sound Agricultural Company, or PSAC, it is helpful to consider Nisqually's farming outstations. These satellite farms, which encircle Fort Nisqually on the Nisqually Plains, in a sense form a context for PSAC activities in the region. So in other words, I think if we really want to understand what happened at Fort Nisqually, we can't just go to Fort Nisqually itself. That's the first step. But we need to think about the outstations, the other farms, the other activities that the fort was involved in. In my presentation, I will first discuss briefly the farming outstations of Fort Nisqually in general. Then I will talk in more detail about three of the specific farms, Tuliflo, Muck, Old and New, and Tennequa. The Puget Sound Agricultural Company in the mid-19th century controlled a vast area of 150,000 acres between the Puyallup and Nisqually rivers. As historian George Dickey noted, all of this land could not be worked from the Fort Nisqually farm. So you have a farm around Fort Nisqually, but then you had to really use this land effectively. They had to create these satellite farms out there. So outstations or satellite farms were created by the company at strategic places or points in the area between the two rivers, as seen in the map from this issue of Occurrences magazine. There were even a few farms started south of the Nisqually River in what is now Thurston County. Most of the outstations began simply as a hut for a herder and pens for cattle or sheep. They became more diverse over time. One team of researchers has concluded that eventually there were different types of stations. Quote, farms were generally from 25 to 150 acres each, herdsman stations from 20 to 40 acres, and corrals and sheep parks were 2 to 10 acres. A range of structures existed at the outstations, including the dwelling houses for workers, both laborers and overseers, sheds and corrals. Company records frequently mention the destruction of old buildings and the construction of new ones. As George Dickey stated, quote, some of these places, such as Tuliflo and Muck Station, developed into elaborate farming establishments with as much land under cultivation as the Fort Farm, unquote. Now, I think one of the most interesting things is people that worked in this fort were really a multi-ethnic in nature. Englishmen, French Canadians, Hawaiians, Native Americans, Scots, and individuals of mixed descent labored together at the farms. American Indian employees, both men and women, were especially important for the ongoing tasks of gardening and livestock raising. The company employees created a cultural landscape which surrounded the Fort Nisqually headquarters. By cultural landscape, I meant they created a way of life here that existed for a number of decades. And it was really a bringing together of different peoples and different cultures. Still, this cultural landscape did not exist in a vacuum. In 1846, Great Britain and the United States signed a treaty which divided the Oregon country at the 49th parallel. Even though the international agreement protected the rights of the Hudson's Bay Company and Puget Sound Agricultural Company south of the new border, some American settlers began to encroach upon company holdings. The pressure of American settlers greatly hindered the operations of the outstations. Only in 1869 was the conflict finally resolved with the purchase of company rights in the region by the U.S. government. The British enterprises withdrew to north of the international boundary. Fort Nisqually's outstations were abandoned to the land-hungry Americans, but many former PSAC employees claimed land in the area. Now, I would like to talk about 3 different stations. There were a number of outstations. Many of them we know very little about. We don't even know the exact location, but these 3 we know much about. The first example is Tuliflo, which can be seen on this redrawn copy of an old sketch map. The satellite farm was situated south of American Lake near Murray Creek. Presently, the site is on the Fort Lewis Military Reservation in Pierce County. Tuliflo is an interesting place name of Native American origin, but we just don't know what it means. The Tuliflo farm played a key role in the network of Fort Nisqually's outstations until the mid-1850s. It served as field headquarters for the farms on the Nisqually Plains. As historian George Dickey wrote, quote, "All of the work at the other stations were directed from Tuliflo. Consequently, Tuliflo was a large farm with well-developed facilities." Dr. William Tomei of Fort Nisqually drew in 1847 the map of Tuliflo on which this slide is based. It shows the extent of the outstation at that time. Features noted on the sketch include a spring, a shepherd station, and potato fields. Areas of good soil are also recorded. So you can see, you think of the HBC as being a fur trading company. Actually, this was corporate farming, farming on a massive scale. Here is a recent view of the Tuliflo area. Little is known about the early years of the Tuliflo outstation. There's definitely more information on the operations of the farm in the 1850s. In particular, surviving Tuliflo journals for parts of 1851 and 1856 to 57 contain much data. These documents mention various buildings at the station such as houses, barns, and stables. They also noted the presence of a chicken coop, slaughterhouse, storehouse, and granary. I think it's interesting visiting the site. This is on the Fort Lewis Military Reservation. And like Muck and Tennequat, which is off the reservation, but Muck is on Fort Lewis, you go there and you think of all these people, all these activities, and you look around you and there's nothing. There's just trees, there's just open field. And been a lot of change over time. Here's another current view of Tuliflo. If you're wondering what all the people are doing, it's not a treasure hunt. There are students from PLU that are doing some survey work for Dr. Holz back there. By 1855, another map created by Dr. Tomei recorded buildings on both sides of Murray Creek at Tuliflo, and sizable cultivated fields. In a sense, this was the calm before the storm. In 1856 to 57, controversy swept over the outstation. At that time, Thomas Dean, who had been appointed manager of Tuliflo Farm in 1855, tried to seize control of the outstation as payment for back wages. He filed for a donation land claim on the site. The PSAC sent out William Gray to defend its interest in Tuliflo. Months of litigations and confrontations followed, recorded in detail in the outstation's journal. And the thing that hindered the company in protecting their claims is, even though legally under the 1846 treaty they had rights to their claims, the Americans, many Americans felt that the British had no place here, and so they were willing to push them out. And if Dr. Tomey took these to local courts to have this decided, if they had a jury or even American judges handle the case, there was so much nationalism against the British at that time, they could never win locally. Dean, supported by many of the American settlers, finally won the struggle for Tuliflo and acquired title to the property. The PSAC abandoned the outlying farm by 1860. However, the British enterprise was reimbursed for all of its old holdings, including Tuliflo Farm, in the 1869 agreement with the United States government. In the spring of 1997, Dr. David Holzbeck and his class of Pacific Lutheran University students went to Tuliflo and carried out successful test excavations at the site. Some of the students are seen in this slide. Now, the results is they were able to pinpoint the locations of some of the buildings, and they determined that some of the apple trees on the site probably date back from the days of the PSAC. Here are some of the artifacts excavated at Tuliflo. They're fragments, but they provide much information to the professional archaeologist. You can actually tell a lot from the ceramic patterns of them. There's books that identify these, and you can help even date when they came from London, from England. My second example of outstation is muck, old and new. The first muck station, later called Old Muck, can be seen on this redrawn copy of another 1847 map drawn by Dr. Tolman. Old Muck was located near Muck Creek on what is currently the Fort Lewis Military Reservation, Pierce County. The farm's name it doesn't mean muddy or anything. It's Chinook jargon from the word muck-a-muck that means to eat, buy, food, picnic, diet, or feast. So I believe that indicates that this was a source of food for Native Americans. Interestingly, the PSAC called the creek not Mud Creek, but Douglas River, after James Douglas, an officer of the British enterprise, who later was quite famous up in British Columbia. Not much is known about the PSAC operations at Old Muck. There are no surviving station journals. The 1847 map shows the existence at the farm of a dwelling house, oat shed, potato house, and stable. In addition, there are recorded an oat field, a potato field, and a shearing park on the sketch map. This is a current view of the Old Muck site. Potatoes appear to have been especially important at this farming outstation. The few references in the Tuliflo Farm Journal to Old Muck concentrated on potatoes. For example, the June 4th, 1851 entry of this journal noted that 60 bushels of potatoes were planted at Muck. In November 1852, Richard Feander was sent to manage the Muck outstation. Following orders, he moved the farm to a better agricultural site. According to George Dickey, quote, "The station was relocated a mile to the east along Muck Creek to a location where better land was available for growing crops," unquote. Being economical, the company employees tore down the dwelling house at Old Muck. They rebuilt it at the new farm site, which became known as New Muck. Here's a current view of New Mud. In 1854, Richard Feander filed a donation lacking of both